in their nailed ships on the sounding sea over the deep water to make for Dublin for Ireland again, for they were shamed in their souls. But the brothers, the king and the Atheling, both together sought their comrades in the land of the West Saxons, rejoicing battle. No slaughter yet was greater made here in this island of people slain before this time with the edge of the sword.
My name is Oren Stott, and I am on the search to locate the life and times of King Aethelstan, a man who reigned from 924 until his death in 939, the father of England.
To assess the reign and achievements of King Aethelstan, we must venture through the lineage and through the Dark Ages from which the Anglo-Saxons inhabited the Isles of Britain, and how these events altered the course of history. For thousands of years, the British Isles was inhabited by Celtic tribes that had migrated from all over Europe. These Celts would become subject to Roman rule, which would then decline in the 5th century before totally collapsing. Germanic tribes of Anglo-Saxons would inhabit the British Isles and form the Heptarchy, which the future King Aethelstan would find himself inheriting by 927. The Heptarchy persisted of 7 petty kingdoms in squabbles for dynastic power and influence over their neighbouring kingdoms. Northumbria to the north, Mercia in the Midlands, East Anglia to the east, Kent, Sussex and Essex to the southeast, and finally Wessex to the southwest. Our search for Aethelstan begins in the north at the Battle of Brunanburh.
I'm at the Aethelstan village on the Wirral Peninsula here in England. In this episode I'm going to be talking about the life and times of King Aethelstan, who ruled England between 927 and 939. King of the Anglo-Saxons from 924 to 927. And then once he took Northumbria, he was then King of the English from 927 till 939 at his death. In 937, King Aethelstan fought one of the greatest battles here on English soil in the Wirral Peninsula. This battle was the Battle of Brunanburh, and he with his Anglo-Saxon army fought off a Scottish-Norse coalition army, which consisted from Norse Vikings from Dublin, consisted of the Scots from Scotland, and also Celtic Britons from the Kingdom of Strathclyde. If King Aethelstan had lost this battle, then the whole world as we know it, and England, probably would cease to exist in its current state. You can see behind me the Irish Sea. Near the Irish Sea, you probably would have seen over 1,000 years ago hundreds of these coalition army ships ready for battle, hungry for glory.
But for such a battle to have struck these isles requires the examination of the political landscape before Aethelstan's time. Aethelstan's great-great-grandfather was King Egbert. Egbert's reign saw the revival of West Saxon influence and the shift in power dynamics in England. The Kingdom of Mercia had predominantly been the superior kingdom over them all between the 8th and early 9th centuries. This was known as the Mercian supremacy. The tides would change when King Egbert would secure a triumphant victory over the Mercians at the Battle of Ellendon in 825, which would pave the way for West Saxon influence. In 878, Aethelstan's grandfather, King Alfred the Great, secured England's survival at the Battle of Edington, defeating the Great Heathen Army and forcing its Viking leader, Guthrum, into submission. Alfred's Wessex, the last free Anglo-Saxon realm, had come close to succumbing to Viking rule. Aethelstan would have drawn strength and wisdom from his ancestors like Alfred, for he established the groundwork for a unified Kingdom of England. Aethelstan would inherit this grand succession and would be crowned the first King of England in 927. Aethelstan's predecessors, piece by piece, reclaimed parts of England from the Vikings, posing a threat to all the Viking and British leaders, eventually imploding in on itself when these factions would join forces and take the fight to King Aethelstan at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937. Aethelstan was the firstborn son to Alfred the Great's son Edward the Elder, the future King of Wessex, and Edward's first wife Egwin. While we don't know too much about Aethelstan's earlier life, there was an early 12th century historian called William of Malmesbury who provides us with an overwhelming account of Aethelstan's youth.
It's believed he had access to a life of King Athelstan, which has since been destroyed or lost somehow. It doesn't exist today, but it did then. Even he wasn't too sure about Athelstan's mother. There were rumours even at the time that he was illegitimate, or that his mother was of common birth. There was even a legend about her being a shepherd's daughter.
Edward bonded in a later 2 recorded marriages with Elfled and Eadgifu. Whether Egwin had died or was disregarded for political matters is unknown. What Edward had done though proved complicating a smooth transfer of power beyond his death.
Later on in 899, King Edward has assumed the crown, but he has Aethelstan sent to Mercia. Can you give us any information about that?
I mean, it was a tradition that you would send your children to a royal court, usually to someone who was your ally, even be trained to rule and to be tutored. But there's also a possibility that his second wife perhaps didn't like having the son by the first wife around, who was a threat to her children.
Edward had Aethelstan sent to his aunt and uncle's kingdom of Mercia to be taught there, but the reason for this is uncertain. Regardless, Aethelstan was sent to Mercia in the company of his aunt, Lady Ethelfled, the daughter of Alfred the Great, and with his uncle, Lord Ethelred. Both of whom were bonded in a marriage alliance during Alfred's time, with the objective of working closely together to fight off the Vikings. In Mercia, Aethelstan would have still been privileged to an exceptional education, a curriculum similar to that of the Carolingian model in Francia.
So she would probably have sent him to Worcester, we think. It seems to have been the centre of learning in Mercia. It's almost like Ethelfled is preparing him.
We do see Aethelstan on hunting or potentially on hunting expeditions with Ethelfled. Do you think these hunting expeditions would have been a great way for Aethelstan to foster these relationships with the lords?
There was definitely training for combat involved, but it would have been something that involved the whole court as well. It would have been a way for them to accept him.
In the meantime, King Edward with his sister Ethelfled would conquer the Viking territories of eastern England. They annexed East Anglia and the confederacy of the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw together.
Mercia having been cut in two and part of it given to the Vikings, that was the main basis of her campaigning. The 5 boroughs were, if I recall, Derby, Leicester, Lincoln, Nottingham and Stamford. She was focusing more on Derby and Leicester. Her brother was coming from the south for places like Stamford. There was this pincer movement going on between the two of them to try and reclaim the Midlands, essentially. By which time Athelstan is in his perhaps early teens.
Edward with his sister now faced just one last Viking stronghold, the Kingdom of York. In Ethelstan's time, this would be one of his first encounters during kingship.
Right behind me is Malmesbury Abbey. Now, Malmesbury Abbey actually hosts the body of King Aethelstan. It was buried underneath the abbey on his death in 939. King Aethelstan actually has his own tomb inside the abbey itself that was constructed in the 14th century to commemorate his death. So follow me and we'll head inside and we'll take a look at the tomb. This is the tomb of King Aethelstan. It was built in the 14th century to commemorate his life as king and unifying the English. Now, why Aethelstan was buried here in Malmesbury raises a good question, and the reason for that is because of a certain Saint Aldhelm. Now, this Aldhelm actually founded Malmesbury Abbey. He was also an ancestor to Aethelstan. Aethelstan had descended from Aldhelm. Aethelstan had always admired and appreciated the works and the devotion to Christianity from Aldhelm. And because of this, Aethelstan wanted to be closer with him, and that's why he's buried here in Malmesbury Abbey and wanted to be spiritually closer to him.
In 924, King Edward would die, and the Mercians would immediately proclaim Aethelstan as their king, while his half-brother Elfward would be favoured in Wessex. However, Elfward would die mysteriously just 2 weeks later. Aethelstan would be consecrated as king, but not for well over a year until September 925. The fact that Aethelstan never once married has raised a looming speculation that perhaps the West Saxon nobility demanded oaths from Aethelstan to never marry or produce heirs, to allow for a smooth transfer of power beyond his death.
It was in January of 926 when King Aethelstan met with the King of York Sihtric at a place called Tamworth, and both kings here struck an agreement with each other. It was where Aethelstan married his full-blooded sister Eadgyth to Sihtric, and this was in a bonded agreement where they both agreed not to invade each other's territories. Just a year later, King Sihtric of York would die, meaning York was leaderless, and obviously King Aethelstan wanted to harvest the opportunity in this. He went in and swept Northumbria all for himself, and then he was able to start exercising his authority there. He could now begin consolidating his rule over Northumbria and incorporating it into the Kingdom of England. Now, the way he did this was by minting coins. Now, coins were a very good way for a leader to demonstrate their influence across the lands that they held. Right behind me is the York Minster. This is potentially a place that King Aethelstan would have had these coins minted in his name.
I had the great pleasure to see one of his own coins for myself, known as the Athelstan penny, exhibited at the Athelstan Museum in Malmesbury, Wiltshire. The inscription famously reads, Aethelstan Rex Totius Britanniae, Latin for the King of all Britain, suggesting that his influence spread beyond the borders of England to Scotland, Wales and Strathclyde.
We can see this at the Treaty of E01 Bridge. British kings coming to submit to King Aethelstan. This title means a lot for this era. If King Aethelstan was able to gather these kings and gain their submission, then this title speaks volumes.
It is certainly bolstered by its merit when we review charters written before 927, labelling Aethelstan as Anglo-Rum Saxonum Rex, meaning King of the Anglo-Saxons, until he claimed his new title shortly after seizing York. Holding authority over his newly acquired lands, Aethelstan could now call his realm the Kingdom of England. He began establishing his law code and networking, not just domestically, but in foreign diplomacy as well. Fortunate with many half-sisters, Aethelstan sought marriage alliances with the Frankish dynasties of East and West Francia. He would marry his half-sisters Eadgyth to Otto I in 930, and Eadhild to Hugh the Great, Duke of the West Franks in 926. Aethelstan even reinstated a descendant of the great Emperor Charlemagne, Louis, as King of the West Franks in 936. Malmesbury boasts that the whole of Europe sang his praises. Kings thought themselves to be fortunate if they could buy his friendship. Aethelstan also proved to be a just and sympathetic ruler in domestic policy. The Greatly Code, dated between 926 and 930, includes the King's Law Code. Some of his most important laws covered economic growth and thievery. He centralized the buying and selling of goods to the boroughs, large fortified settlements, which regulated tax, encouraged population growth and trade, and cracked down on fraudsters, where royal officials could now moderate transactions. Aethelstan also increased the death penalty age for stealing from 12 to 15 years of age, feeling it was too cruel to execute anyone as young as 12. In 934, Aethelstan is recorded campaigning into Scotland and scorching major towns and settlements. Contemporary records fail to inform us what could have triggered such a series of events. Either Aethelstan was attempting to reinforce his overlordship, or its king Constantine broke the treaty. Having devastated his territories in the north, feuds were beginning to boil, and it was not looking good for King Aethelstan. While in Wessex, Constantine contacted the Viking king of Dublin, Olaf Guthrufsson, and King Owain of Strathclyde. The clans forged an alliance and in 937 declared war on the English king. They began ravaging Northumbria together. Time being precious, Aethelstan with his half-brother Edmund called upon the feuds of Wessex and Mercia and marched, meeting the coalition at Brunanburh, likely located on the Wirral, and there the bloodiest battle commenced. The two shield walls clashed. The battle was hard fought, lasting the whole day. Eventually, it was the English who broke the shield wall of the coalition army. No slaughter yet was greater made here in this island of men slain before this time. Olaf sought the safety of Dublin, likely fleeing by the River Mersey. Constantine retreated back to Scotland, and Owain lay dead on the battlefield along with 4 other kings and 7 earls. King Aethelstan had, on a knife's edge, secured the future for England to survive and prosper for generations. Aethelstan, having secured his legacy, died just 2 years later, and a series of briefer reigns would succeed him, eventually leading to the disastrous reign of Ethelred the Unready, and soon culminating with the Norman conquest of England in 1066, overshadowing Aethelstan and his achievements.
Regardless, King Aethelstan should still be remembered today in history, not just for unifying the English in 927, but for bringing the English to a decisive and great victory at the Battle of Brunanburh in 939, which, had he lost that battle, the whole world as we know it today may have ceased to exist in its current state.